In our last lecture, we introduced the figure of Socrates. And we placed Socrates and his trial within the framework of Athenian democracy and the aftermath of the great war with Sparta. And within the framework of the fact that two of his best pupils, Alcibiades and Critias, had done the most damage to the Athenian democracy, were openly hostile to the Athenian democracy. And Alcibiades' comment at Sparta that democracy is acknowledged folly must represent the teaching of Socrates. Now, Socrates never wrote a book, so we can't be sure. And then we, in fact, have two very divergent portraits of Socrates. One, the play The Clouds by Aristophanes, which we looked at in our last lecture, and the fact of his trial by his fellow Athenians. And on the other hand, the portrait of Xenophon and Plato, two of his pupils whose lives were forever shaped by the trial of their teacher. We want to look today at this legacy of Socrates, Xenophon and Plato, and the pupil of Plato, Aristotle. For if a teacher be judged by the enduring greatness of his pupils, who can equal Socrates? Plato, who is the very foundation of philosophy. It has been said that all of Western philosophy is but a series of footnotes to Plato. And his pupil Aristotle, who is the intellectual father of all of the universities of the world today. And Xenophon, less influential, but a man of action as well as ideas, like Plato, devoted to his teacher. And all three of these intellectual figures, Xenophon, Plato, and Aristotle, were forever molded by what happened on one single day in the year 399. For Plato, that was the very beginning of his whole intellectual pursuit of truth, what the Athenian democracy did to Socrates. And he devoted his first 4 dialogues. For Plato pays the greatest of tributes to his teacher. He puts his ideas into the mouth of Socrates. And Plato devotes his first 4 dialogues to the events surrounding that trial: the Euthyphro, the Apology, the Crito, and the Phaedo. And the Euthyphro provides us with an introduction to Socrates and perhaps sheds some light on why he was so unpopular with his fellow Athenians and the very different picture his students had. Because the Euthyphro begins on that morning when Socrates is to be tried. And Socrates is there in the general area where the courts are held, and it's early in the morning, and a person known to him, Euthyphro, an Athenian, comes up and says, "Socrates, what are you doing here? You never sit on juries." And it is true, Socrates plays no role in politics, as we have seen. "You never sit on juries. Why are you here?" And Socrates says, "Well, I have in fact been accused." "You've been accused? What?" "Well, it's a very serious charge. I am accused of impiety and of corrupting the young." And Euthyphro says, I can't believe this. But Socrates says, "Enough about me. Why are you here?" He said, "Well, I am here to bring an accusation." And in the Athenian legal system, there were no district attorneys and things of this sort. Every citizen had to bring his own charge, and you, if accused, had to defend yourself. So Euthyphro says, "I have come to bring a charge." And Socrates says, "Well, who's it against?" And he says, "It's against my father." "Your father?" "Yes, I am bringing my father up on the charge of murder." "Murder? But he must have killed someone like your mother." "No, as a matter of fact," said Euthyphro, "the person he killed was actually a murderer." "What?" "Yes, we had a hired hand. He got into a drunken brawl with another hired hand, killed him, and then when my father went off to get the police, he tied the man up and the man died of exposure." And you're bringing him up. Well, the law is very clear on this point. And you see, it is an act of piety towards Athens that I bring my father up. It is piety to obey the law, even if it affects your own family. You know, Euthyphro, you are just the person I need to see, because I am accused of impiety, and I don't know what that means. Now, Socrates understood that the first step in knowledge is to define words. And he understood that people so frequently act on the basis of what they think they know without ever pursuing. And so he says, can you explain to me what piety is? We've got a few minutes before my trial is to begin and before you're due in court. So tell me what piety is. And Euthyphro says, well, I suspect I know about as much about piety as anybody. And in fact, Euthyphro was very well known for his piety and had devoted his life to piety. And so he says, all right, Socrates, piety is what the gods love. Socrates says to Euthyphro, what the gods love, I see. Tell me something. Do you believe the stories of the Trojan War? Because that was part of piety, to believe in Homer. Homer was almost the Bible of the Greeks. And Euthyphro says, yes, I do. Do you, Socrates? And Socrates says, well, no, but that's a different story. Tell me something. In the Trojan War, does it not happen that one god is on the side of the Trojans and another on the side of the Greeks? For example, Hera is on the side of the Greeks, Aphrodite is on the side of the Trojans. Yes. Well, now since you believe those stories, you must agree that the gods don't always agree with one another. Well, yes. So, I mean, what the gods love can differ from God to God. Yes. So, that's not really a definition of piety, what the gods love. We must define it more closely. All right, Socrates, piety is what all the gods love. Ah, I see it as what all the gods love. Well, tell me something. Do they love it because it is pious? Or is it pious because the gods love it? There's a difference. Yes, I guess there is. It is, well, I guess it's the gods love it because it's pious. Well, you see, now there you haven't defined it for me. What you have done is given me a quality of it. The gods love it. Socrates, this is getting very complicated. I've got to be in court. No, we've still got time. Please, Euthyphro, answer my question for me. How do we define piety? Let me give you some help, Euthyphro. Would you say that piety is justice? Yes, and that again is a traditional definition, conventional wisdom. Piety is justice. All right, tell me this. Is all piety the same as all justice? I don't see what you mean. Well, justice in a way is fair play, is it not? Yes. Well, what if we find a drachma on the street and we divide it up? 3 obols for you, 3 obols for me. That's fair play, right? That's just. But you wouldn't call that piety, would you? No, I don't guess so. Really, I have got to get, no, you don't have to get into court yet. We're just about to get there, I can see. So that's not, all justice is not the same as piety. How about this? Would piety be that part of justice which refers to the gods? And that's another very conventional definition. Piety is paying justice to the gods. That's it, Socrates, we've got it now. No, wait. I mean, how are we just towards the gods? I mean, really, you must know a whole lot about piety, Euthyphro, because you're bringing your own father up on these charges. So, is piety justice towards the gods? Yes. How can we be just towards the gods? Well, we serve the gods. We serve the gods, I see. Well, now, you know, somebody who owns a horse serves that horse by brushing it and feeding it. That makes the horse better. Are you telling me that we mortals make the gods better? No, but we offer them sacrifices. And how does that make a god better? Well, it doesn't, but they like it. Ah, so piety is that part of justice which the gods like. Yes. So piety is what the gods love, right? Yes. No, we've already had that definition, don't you remember? And it doesn't work. Socrates, stop. I have got to go now. But Euthyphro, come back. You've got to help me. Now here we have 2 sides to Socrates. On the one hand, in the view of Plato and Xenophon, his pupils who love him so much. This is a man on trial for his life, Socrates, who stops and instead of focusing on his own trial and defense, is trying to help this man understand that he doesn't know, that he is taking the gravest of actions based on thinking he is wise when he is not wise. But to Euthyphro, who is a perfectly decent citizen in his own mind, all Socrates has done is tear down all of his values and lift him nothing in return. And that is what Socrates had done for years. Gone around Athens, questioning and questioning everybody he could find. What is justice? What is piety? What is right and wrong? And so, his Athenian citizens had come to be as frustrated and angry with him as Euthyphro had been. And now, the time is there, and he must go into the courtroom. And the apology of Plato is not Socrates saying, "I am so sorry." Xenophon also wrote an apology. And in both of them, apologia means Socrates speaking forth, giving his story. And the apology of Plato begins with Socrates standing up after the accusers, Anytus and Melitus, had presented their case. And in Athens, the whole trial had to be done in one day. They have presented their case, and Socrates gets up and says, "You know, I am surprised that my accusers have left themselves so open to criticism, because you will see immediately that they have lied about me. They have told you I am so clever as a speaker that I can make a good argument seem bad and a bad argument seem good. But right now you're listening to me, and you see I speak very simply, just in the ordinary language of the marketplace. So from the start you see that they are lying about me. And the problem in this case is that I have to deal with one hidden accusation and one open accusation. The open accusation, for which I am formally on trial, is that I am guilty of impiety for believing in the new and different divinities, not believing in the gods of Athens. And that is a charge for which I can die. And the other is, for which I can also die, that I am guilty of corrupting the young. But the hidden accusation is the stories that have been circulating about me for years. That I am a sophist, that I take money for teaching. And these were the stories you saw in that play by Aristophanes, the comic playwright, The Clouds, in which you saw me mumbling all kinds of nonsense and floating around in a basket. So Socrates knew how important that play was 28 years before in defining what the Athenians thought about him. And for years now, people have gone about slandering me, repeating these stories over and over again. And I cannot bring them up and challenge them. So it is like boxing with shadows. And their slanders have done grave harm to me. And you have brought me here because of those slanders. Why am I slandered in this fashion? I will tell you. Years ago, a friend of mine, Chaerephon, you know who he was. He was a friend of the democracy. He died fighting for the democracy. He was my closest friend. And he went to the oracle of Apollo at Delphi and he said, "Is there any man wiser than Socrates?" And the god Apollo, "Shut up, you atheist," because the Athenian juries could speak out. And they shout out, "Shut up, you atheist, don't you take the name of Apollo in vain." I have my right to say. And the god Apollo told Chaerephon that no one was wiser than Socrates. And he came back and told me this. Now, Chaerephon died fighting for the democracy, but his relatives are here, and they'll vouch for the story. And I pondered over and over again in my mind, how could the god mean that I was wise? So I went around and tried to find out. And I was a very wise statesman in those days, We're probably talking about the 440s. That statesman would, of course, been Pericles. He thought he could solve everything by reason. And so I went to him and began to question him. And I found out that he wasn't wise about anything that was important. Oh, he could make wonderful policies, but he had never really thought about what wisdom is. So then I went to a famous playwright, a lot of poets, but Socrates in particular he would have meant. And I found that they could get really all inspired and write these magnificent verses, but they had never thought about what wisdom was. So then I went to ordinary Athenians, and this is a crushing blow. The ordinary Athenian thought he was very wise. And I questioned them, and I found out, yes, this person was a great stonemason. This person was a good carpenter. But because they were a good carpenter, they thought they knew what wisdom was, but they didn't. And these people got mad at me. They got mad at me the same way that Euthyphro had gotten mad at him. They got mad at me. And then I understood what the God meant was that he is wise who is like Socrates and knows he doesn't know. He is wise who knows he doesn't know. And so over the years, I have built up all this resentment. And now it is bearing fruit in these trumped up charges. And I'm going to show you how trumped up they are. Come here. He calls one of his accusers up. Now, listen. I've got the charge right here. You've got to answer me when I question you about it. Socrates does not believe in the gods of Athens, but in new and different divinities. And Socrates is guilty of corrupting the young. Is that the charge? You've got to answer. Yes, that's the charge. All right, let's start with the first one. So I don't believe in the gods. That's right, men of the jury. Socrates does not believe in the gods. So I'm an atheist? That's right. He is a total atheist. He believes that the sun is a piece of red-hot metal. Now, right there, if you had listened to my earlier lecture, you would have known that that was Anaxagoras. Remember? And you can buy his books for a very small price in the market. I never said that. So you just have contempt for the jury. Now let me ask you this. You say, I do not believe in the gods of Athens, but in new and different divinities, and that I am an atheist. Now let's explore this. I believe in new and different divinities. What is a divinity? It is a divine thing. Can you believe in divinities and not believe in gods? Can you believe in fishy things without believing in fishes? Can you believe in horsey things without believing in horses? So how can I believe in divine things, divinities, without believing in the divine, in God? So your very charge contradicts. And what about corrupting the young? I corrupt them? Yes, you do. Well, who makes them better? Does the judge sitting there make the youth of Athens better? Well, of course he does. How about these 501 jurors? Well, yes. What about the other citizens of Athens? Well, I mean, you don't want to make anybody mad at you, so you say, yeah, yes, they do too. So everybody in Athens except Socrates makes the young people better. You've never thought about this. You've never thought about the young people. Your charges are obvious lies. Now you go sit down. I want to talk to the jury some more. Now, is this making the jury happy with him? No. In fact, they take these two accusers, Anytus and Meletus, as people trying to do their civic duty. And he has just not only shown them to be utterly fraudulent, but to the jurors, it looks as though Socrates is really making good arguments seem bad and bad arguments seem good, doesn't it? So then he goes on and says, now let me ask you this. Why don't you say, all right, Socrates, we know these are trumped up charges, but we are tired of your going around and harassing us like this. Aren't you ashamed of living such a life that everybody in Athens hates you? No, I am not ashamed. I took on this mission from God, and what would make me ashamed is if I stopped doing it. Well, I tell you what, Socrates, if you will stop doing it, we will drop these charges. I am not going to do that. I am going to continue. As long as I live, I am going to go around and question and follow the truth wherever it is. Now, what if you say, all right, Socrates, if you're so smart, why aren't you in politics? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Because no honest man can survive in your democracy. It is so corrupt. Now, the jury is really upset with him by this time. And just to make sure they're mad enough, he says, not only has he shown the charges to be trumped up, he has said their democracy, which is so dear to them, is corrupt. He now says, now, what you expect me to do at this stage is to bring in my wife and children. That's standard in an Athenian trial. You bring in your wife and children, and you say, look, if you put me to death, it is going to rob my family of all support. And the children are supposed to cry, the wife is supposed to cry, and you are thus humiliated. That is part of the purpose of the trial. He says, I'm not going to bring them in. Yes, I've got children and a wife, but I'm not going to bring them in. That has nothing to do with the trial whatsoever. It is for you to make your decision. But I tell you this, I will continue my mission. Well, the jury goes off and comes back, and by a vote of 281 to 220 finds him guilty. Now, at this stage, in Athenian law, you have the right to propose a penalty. And although these charges of impiety and corrupting the young carry the death penalty, you can propose another penalty. And Socrates makes his second speech to the jury. And this is certainly the time to conciliate them. He says instead, you know what I am going to propose for my fine? I am going to propose that, instead of putting me to death, instead of imposing a fine upon me, that you give me free room and board for the rest of my life. Well, that is what you give somebody who wins at the Olympic Games. I have benefited the city far more than they have. So, jury goes away. Socrates has also proposed to them, when they say we got to have some reasonable proposal, he says, I will give you a fine. I will pay a fine. And my students here and their relatives are the collateral for this fine. And he proposes a fine of 60 mina, which is a substantial sum, around $200,000. So not only has he said they should give him free room and board, he also proposes a realistic punishment to make the Athenians have to decide. They can't later say we would have saved Socrates except he wouldn't give us an alternative. He has now given them the alternative. And they come back and find him guilty and sentence him to death. And so he makes his final speech to the jury. I want to speak to those who voted in my behalf, for you are real jurymen. The others think that they have gained something by sentencing me to death. All they have done is harm themselves. They cannot harm me. No one can ever harm you unless they make you do a wrong act. If they had made me stop my mission, that would have harmed me. But they have only harmed themselves by committing this injustice. As for myself, I am not afraid to die. In fact, I have within me a voice. And that voice has been with me ever since I undertook this mission. It is, I think, the voice of God. And whenever I start to do something that's a bad idea, for example, whenever I think about getting involved in politics, that little voice speaks out and says, no. But today, when I was coming to this trial, that voice said not a word. So I knew I should go ahead. And what is death? It is one of two things. Either it is complete sleep, nothing. Have you ever had a night's sleep where you don't even dream? Why, the king of Persia with all his wealth cannot buy a night's sleep like that. Or else we go down into the underworld, like Odysseus, and think what a time I'll have down there, questioning, Agamemnon, Achilles, Odysseus himself. So, the time has come for you to go away and for me to die. Which is better is known to God alone. So in the final words of his apology, he invokes God. The story is carried on by Plato in his dialogue, the Crito. It has Socrates in jail, and it has one of his closest friends, Crito, coming and saying, Socrates, we have arranged everything. You can escape, go to the city of Thebes, and there receive hospitality. And he says, I'm not going to escape. I'm going to stay right here. If I were to escape after having been found legally guilty, that would set a bad example. I am going to obey the law. And so the young people will not be corrupted by my example. And so he stays. And the time comes for his sentence. He had to wait a period of time until a ship on a religious mission came back, because no one could be put to death during the time of a religious festival. But now the time had come. The jailer has come in and told him that the poison which he is to take is prepared, the hemlock. He has sent away his wife and children, and some of his students are weeping. And he says the words I gave in an earlier lecture. I sent my wife away, and now here you are, worse than women, weeping like this. Stop it. What is bad? I am going to die. My whole life has been a preparation for death. Preparing myself so that my soul will be free. And the whole life of a philosopher, the search for wisdom, is the preparation for death. Because wisdom is the understanding of absolute truths, of absolute justice, absolute harmony, absolute beauty, absolute honor. And the soul that has prepared itself will be united with God. And that is what I wait for. And so the jailer comes in and says to Socrates, you don't have to take it right away. Many people wait for hours. And his students say, wait, spend more time with us. And he says, why? What is the point? And so he asked the jailer, can I pour out a little sacrifice to the gods? Again, his piety. And the jailer says, well, we actually only make enough to work, so no. And so he drinks it off. And the jailer says, you should walk around a little bit. Socrates has already commended the jailer to his students and said, take good care of him. He has been the friendliest of men to me. Then he walks around and he says, my legs are beginning to feel heavy. So he lies down and he pulls the sheet over his face, lies there, and then suddenly pulls it back down and says, by the way, friends, I owe a rooster to the god Asclepius. That most traditional of gestures, Asclepius, the god of health, who is freeing Socrates from all the ills of life. And then pulls the sheet back and dies. In the words of Plato, such was the end of the man who of all the men of our time was the best, the wisest, and the most just. And Xenophon and Plato, by the words of their apology, would hand down through history this condemnation of the Athenian democracy, which had put to death the best man of its age, who had fearlessly spoken out for truth and whose whole life was a living witness to the search for wisdom. The greatest of all the Athenians, Socrates, immortal, passing his legacy down.